ready, baby. This is it. We are going in. We're going in, baby. Are you ready? Are you ready for the epic conclusion? It's Dune Wave Life, baby. Let's go.
Epic, 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 epic. Homerian. What's another word for epic? International high five. We're going straight in. Actually, no, we're going to do recap for that. I don't get it. Let's have another. We need another word for epic. Epic is it's too pedestrian this day and age. Shouts out to Viveki John. You know, we were talking about this yesterday on Meaning Crisis and Chill. Certain words, baby, certain words we used them wrong, or we used them too much or something. They don't work the way they used to, you know? Epic ain't big enough a word for this, baby, this. Dune Wave, the finale, Dune. Audio book club. We never did quite work out what it was called. In my head, it's Dune Wave Audio Book Club, I guess. But what we've been doing, in case you didn't know, for the past, I don't know how long. It feels like it's been a while. For a while. Every Wednesday, we've been coming in here and we've been playing a disc or two from the 90s Dune audiobook. It was the 90s. It was like 91. Could be wrong on that. And your boy Akira the Don has been live scoring it, playing music with the aim of the music fitting. I know if enhancing isn't the right word. Fitting, accompanying in a synergistic fashion, you know. It's been a very, very intense experience. It's a very difficult thing to do. I don't know why I decided to do it. I don't know why I thought, hey, let's do an experiment. It was an experiment. Let's do an experiment with one of the most beloved and influential and powerful works of fiction of this age, you know? Let's do that, and let's do something notoriously difficult, you know? It's been a very, very intense experience, I gotta say. And here we are, baby. Here we are at the peak. The conclusion. Discs 19 and 20 is a double bill. We started doing double bills in the last stretch, and we realized, wow, doing two is really powerful. Double bills are really powerful with this. Works very well. We need recaps, we need recaps, we need recaps. For the International High Five, do let us know where on this sweet earth you are. This sweet, bountiful earth that is more water than it is not. This one, ours, more water than not. Where on it art thou? And let's have a recap. Let's have your recap, brother, sister. Your recap of this epic tale. What has happened before now? Robert Easley, Chi-Town. Recap. Paul has changed the water of life, lost his infant son, and about to have a reckoning on all that have hurt him. Maybe. Could be. It's possible. Henry's in New Zealand. What's up, baby? Dave Owen is broadcasting the waves from the Sierras of California. Old California holdout. Bubble, USA. What's up, Chris O'Dell? Mate. Get it! Woo! Murfire stuff. Irani is giving the Baron a bitch slapping. D-Man, Tri-State. Her brother is coming. I told you. My brother comes. Ah! My brother comes. Terrifying talking baby. I both love, respect, and am terrified and horrified by you at once. Walking Mall poet, New York Baron Harkonnen. Oh no! Emperor. Oh no! Paul Muad'Dib. Ah yeah! I don't know if it's yeah. I don't know if he's very happy or anything. I mean, I don't know. I guess there's a part of him that's excited to have an opportunity to let rip. What's up, Joey Strachan? Yeah. Strachan. Says Akira the Don, thanks for the enlightenment. Hey, yo, my pleasure. The enlightenment? Oh, that was Akira the Don, yeah. He did dish it out daily from Don Studios, Dripping Springs. That's DS. That's a double DS. I mean, a double DS, that's powerful, right? Enlightenment Central, DS. Ah, yes. No less than the best for the brave citizens of the Meaningwave autonomous zone. Whoa! Maybe it could be possible. Maybe it could be possible that we really have reached this momentous moment. I am excited. I'm scared. No, scared is the right word. No, I am terrified. Terrified. What? Miracle Man again, you know. It's Miracle Man all over again. There's a lot of Miracle Man in this story. Or the other way around. One thing about going through this in this fashion is it's really shown how much is taken from this story, right? How influential this story has been on so many that followed it. Cough, George R. R. Martin, cough. Hey. Cough, Alan Moore, cough. Dan Davis, Tucson, AZ, Paul, put on dad ring and became a duke. Lost a son. Even an emperor may tremble before Muad'Dib. Ow! Zach Salza, rah, fired Rautha to the tune of Rasputin. Everything to the tune of Rasputin. What's the one in our house? In our house, the sticky melody. Dumb ways to die, so many dumb ways to die. Hercules is obsessed. JCC Piano Studio shouts out from my vacay retreat. Get it? Chilling and looking forward to this. KS, Vig music nice. Vig music nice. Kyla Sherrod, Dune! What is up, Fremen fam? Fremen. Fordham 420 says big up to Swedish Dave. Swedish Dave is such a great drug dealer name. What up, Swedish Dave? Got any Veras? Lovely. Zach Hutchins, tell me of your homework, Usul. Love higher stuff. Love Dumb Ways to Die, the song and game. So many dumb ways to die. Zach Hutchins, Homeworld. Oh, Homeworld, not homework. No one can type in our chat anymore. Smash that like. Smash that like, by Jove, it's important. Ooh. Be hitting at my ominous tag. You know I got ominous tag. One of the great things about doing this has been getting really deep in the vapor and associated aspects of my library, you know. I got a whole gang of songs tagged Harkonnen. That will come in useful in the future. Bloody hell, Dave Owen. Whoa, Dave Owen! Coming through the Turbo Super Chat, $100 Turbo Super Chat. Dave Owen in the house. God bless. Thank you, brother. Says, unwrapped my Meaningwave monument on this last Wednesday of 2020. Hey, you got a monument. That's so rare, the rare monument. You mean the monolith? You mean this guy? This guy, of which there's only a few of these exist, you know, and you had one. You can't get these anymore. You can't get them. They were only available for a limited time, and you got one, David Owen. God bless you. Says, thank you for making this year spectacular. Blessings to you all in 2021 and beyond. It's coming. It's coming. Yo! It's coming. 2021, baby, it's just around the corner. Unless you're in Australia, in which case you've been there a week or something, right? Luke, God bless, Meaningwave, Sitch! Some of you Delgado are coming through with the drip and the splash and the splash and the drip. Appreciate you, gang! International high five it is. You already know. Blessed international high five in the final. The final Dune high five. 3, 2, 1. Bye. Hold that thing. Hold it. I've got a song for you before we do this. Before we get in it, before we do this thing. One final time, I got a song for you.
I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer.
Sandstone.
Fear is the little death that brings little obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? Pain. Pain. What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? Pain. Pain. What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? Pain. Pain.
Yo!
What's in the box?
What's in the box? What's in the box? Hey! Ow!
You've heard of animals chewing off a leg to escape a trap? That's an animal kind of trick. A human would remain in the trap, endure the pain, feigning death that he might kill the trapper and remove a threat to his kind. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? To determine if you're human, be silent. It burns. Silence. His world emptied of everything except the hand immersed in agony. He thought he could feel skin curling black on that agonized hand. The flesh crystals and dropping away until only charred bones remained. What's in the box?
What?
What's in the box?
What's in the box?
Pain. Pain. What's in the box?
What's in the box? What's in the box? Hey. Ah!
What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? Pain. Pain. What's in the box? What's in the box? What's in the box? Pain.
Meaningwave, what's done? Let's make some noise. Yeah! Yo, bless up, Chris O'Dell. Appreciate you, baby. Thank you for the support. You bad motherfucker. Chris O'Dell to help start the even beats that will summon Shy Hulu. Let us rumble, brothers and sisters.
The Emperor stood in front of his throne. The Emperor stood in front of his throne. Right hand pressed to right ear, the servo receiver there chattering its report on the situation. The Baron moved 2 steps behind Alia. Sardaukar were leaping to positions at the doors. "We will fall back into space and reform," the Emperor said. "Baron, my apologies. These madmen are attacking under cover of the storm. We will show them an Emperor's wrath then." He pointed at Alia. "Give her body to the storm." As he spoke, Alia fled backward, feigning terror. "Let the storm have what it can take," she screamed, and she backed into the Baron's arms. "I have her, Majesty," the Baron shouted. "Shall I dispatch her now?" Yeah! He hurled her to the floor, clutched his left arm. "I'm sorry, grandfather," Alia said. "You've met the Atreides Gom-Jabbar." She got to her feet, dropped a dark needle from her hand. The Baron fell back. His eyes bulged as he stared at a red slash on his left palm. You... He rolled sideways in his suspensors, a sagging mass of flesh supported inches off the floor, with head lolling and mouth hanging open. "These people are insane," the Emperor snarled. "Quick, into the ship! We'll purge this planet of every—" Something sparkled to his left. A roll of ball lightning bounced away from the wall there, crackled as it touched the metal floor. The smell of burned insulation swept through the Salamlik. "The shield!" one of the Sardaukar officers shouted. "The outer shield is down! They—" His words were drowned in a metallic roaring as the ship wall behind the Emperor trembled and rocked. "They've shot the nose off our ship!" someone called. Dust boiled through the room. Under its cover, Alia leaped up, ran toward the outer door. The Emperor whirled, motioned his people into an emergency door that swung open in the ship's side behind the throne. He flashed a hand signal to a Sardaukar officer leaping through the dust haze. "We will make our stand here," the Emperor ordered. Another crash shook the hutment. The double doors banged open at the far side of the chamber, admitting wind-blown sand and the sound of shouting. A small, black-robed figure could be seen momentarily against the light, Alia darting out to find a knife and, as befitted her Fremen training, to kill Harkonnen and Sardaukar wounded. House Sardaukar charged through a greened yellow haze toward the opening, weapons ready, forming an arc there to protect the Emperor's retreat. "Save yourself, sire!" a Sardaukar officer shouted. "Into the ship!" But the Emperor stood alone now on his dais, pointing toward the doors. A 40-meter section of the hutment had been blasted away there, and the Salamlik's doors opened now onto drifting sand. A dust cloud hung low over the outside world, blowing from pastel distances. Static lightning crackled from the cloud, and the spark flashes of shields being shorted out by the storm's charge could be seen through the haze. The plain surged with figures in combat, Sardaukar and leaping, gyrating, robed men who seemed to come down out of the storm. All this was as a frame for the target of the Emperor's pointing hand. Out of the sand haze came an orderly mass of flashing shapes, great rising curves with crystal spokes that resolved into the gaping mouths of sandworms, a massed wall of them, each with troops of Fremen riding to the attack. They came in a hissing wedge, robes whipping in the wind as they cut through the melee on the plain. Onward toward the Emperor's hutment they came, while the House Sardaukar stood awed for the first time in their history by an onslaught their minds found difficult to accept. But the figures leaping from the worm backs were men, and the blades flashing in that ominous yellow light were a thing the Sardaukar had been trained to face. They threw themselves into combat, and it was man-to-man on the plain of Arrakeen, while a picked Sardaukar bodyguard pressed the Emperor back into the ship, sealed the door on him, and prepared to die at the door as part of his shield. In the shock of comparative silence within the ship, the Emperor stared at the wide-eyed faces of his suite, seeing his oldest daughter with the flush of exertion on her cheeks, the old truth-sayer standing like a black shadow with her hood pulled about her face, finding at last the faces he sought, the 2 guildsmen. They wore the guild grey, unadorned, and it seemed to fit the calm they maintained, despite the high emotions around them. The taller of the two, though, held a hand to his left eye. As the Emperor watched, someone jostled the guildsman's arm, the hand moved, and the eye was revealed. The man had lost one of his masking contact lenses, and the eye stared out, a total blue, so dark as to be almost black. The smaller of the pair elbowed his way a step nearer the Emperor, said, "We cannot know how it will go," and the taller companion, hand restored to eye, added in a cold voice, "But this Muad'Dib cannot know either." The words shocked the Emperor out of his daze. He checked the scorn on his tongue by a visible effort because it did not take a guild navigator's single-minded focus on the main chance to see the immediate future out on that plain. Were these two so dependent upon their faculty that they had lost the use of their eyes and their reason? He wondered. "Reverend Mother," he said, "we must devise a plan." She pulled the hood from her face, met his gaze with an unblinking stare. The look that passed between them carried complete understanding. They had one weapon left, and both knew it. Treachery. "Summon Count Fenring from his quarters," the Reverend Mother said. The Padishah Emperor nodded, waved for one of his aides to obey that command.
He was warrior and mystic, ogre and saint, the fox and the innocent, chivalrous, ruthless, less than a god, more than a man. There is no measuring Muad'Dib's motives by ordinary standards. In the moment of his triumph, he saw the death prepared for him, yet he accepted the treachery. Can you say he did this out of a sense of justice? Whose justice, then? Remember, we speak now of the Muad'Dib who ordered battle drums made from his enemies' skins. The Muad'Dib who denied the conventions of his ducal past with a wave of the hand, saying merely, "I am the Kwisatz Haderach." That is reason enough. From Arrakis Awakening, by the Princess Irulan.
It was to the Arrakeen governor's mansion, the old residency the Atreides had first occupied on Dune, that they escorted Paul Muad'Dib on the evening of his victory. The building stood as Rabban had restored it, virtually untouched by the fighting, although there had been looting by townspeople. Some of the furnishings in the main hall had been overturned or smashed. Paul strode through the main entrance with Gurney Halleck and Stilgar a pace behind. Their escort fanned out into the great hall, straightening the place and clearing an area for Muad'Dib. One squad began investigating that no sly trap had been planted here. "I remember the day we first came here with your father," Gurney said. He glanced around at the beams and the high slitted windows. "I didn't like this place then, and I like it less now. One of our caves would be safer." "Spoken like a true Fremen," Stilgar said, and he marked the cold smile that his words brought to Muad'Dib's lips. "Will you reconsider, Muad'Dib?" "This place is a symbol," Paul said. "Rabban lived here. By occupying this place, I seal my victory for all to understand. Send men through the building. Touch nothing. Just be certain no Harkonnen people or toys remain." "As you command," Stilgar said, and reluctance was heavy in his tone as he turned to obey. Communications men hurried into the room with their equipment, began setting up near the massive fireplace. The Fremen guard that augmented the surviving Fedaykin took up stations around the room. There was muttering among them, much darting of suspicious glances. This had been too long a place of the enemy for them to accept their presence in it casually. "Gurney, have an escort bring my mother and Chani," Paul said. "Does Chani know yet about our son?" "The message was sent, my lord." "Are the makers being taken out of the basin yet?" "Yes, my lord, the storm's almost spent." "What's the extent of the storm damage?" Paul asked. "In the direct path, on the landing field and across the spice storage yards of the plain, extensive damage," Gurney said. "As much from battle as from the storm." Nothing money won't repair, I presume, Paul said. Except for the lies, my lord, Gurney said, and there was a tone of reproach in his voice as though to say, when did an Atreides worry first about things when people were at stake? But Paul could only focus his attention on the inner eye, and the gaps visible to him in the time wall that still lay across his path. Through each gap, the jihad raged away down the corridors of the future. He sighed, crossed the hall, seeing a chair against the wall. The chair had once stood in the dining hall and might even have held his own father. At the moment, though, it was only an object to rest his weariness and conceal it from the men. He sat down, pulling his robes around his legs, loosening his still suit at the neck. The Emperor is still holed up in the remains of his ship, Gurney said. For now, contain him there, Paul said. Have they found the Harkonnens yet? They're still examining the dead. What reply from the ships up there? He jerked his chin toward the ceiling. No reply yet, my lord. Paul sighed, resting against the back of his chair. Presently he said, Bring me a captive Sardaukar. We must send a message to our Emperor. It's time to discuss terms. Yes, my lord. Gurney turned away, dropped a hand signal to one of the Fedaykin, who took up close guard position beside Paul. Gurney, Paul whispered. Since we've been rejoined, I've yet to hear you produce the proper quotation for the event. He turned, saw Gurney swallow, saw the sudden grim hardening of the man's jaw. As you wish, my lord, Gurney said. He cleared his throat, rasped. And the victory that day was turned into mourning unto all the people. For the people heard say that day how the king was grieved for his son. Paul closed his eyes, forcing grief out of his mind, letting it wait as he had once waited to mourn his father. Now he gave his thoughts over to this day's accumulated discoveries, the mixed futures and the hidden presence of Alia within his awareness. Of all the uses of time vision, this was the strangest. I have breasted the future to place my words where only you can hear them, Alia had said. Even you cannot do that, my brother. I find it an interesting play, and, oh yes, I've killed our grandfather, the demented old Baron. He had very little pain. Silence. His time sense had seen her withdrawal. Muad'Dib. Paul opened his eyes to see Stilgar's black-bearded visage above him, the dark eyes glaring with battle light. You found the body of the old Baron, Paul said. The hush of the person settled over Stilgar. How could you know? He whispered. We just found the body in that great pile of metal the Emperor built. Paul ignored the question, seeing Gurney return accompanied by two Fremen who supported a captive Sardaukar. Here's one of them, my lord, Gurney said. He signed to the guard to hold the captive 5 paces in front of Paul. The Sardaukar's eyes, Paul noted, carried a glazed expression of shock. A blue bruise stretched from the bridge of his nose to the corner of his mouth. He was of the blonde, chisel-featured cast, the look that seemed synonymous with rank among the Sardaukar, yet there were no insignia on his torn uniform except the gold buttons with the imperial crest and the tattered braid of his trousers. I think this one's an officer, my lord, Gurney said. Paul nodded, said, I am the Duke Paul Atreides. Do you understand that, man? The Sardaukar stared at him unmoving. Speak up, Paul said, or your emperor may die. The man blinked, swallowed. Who am I? Paul demanded. You are the Duke Paul Atreides, the man husked. He seemed too submissive to Paul. But then the Sardaukar had never been prepared for such happenings as this day. They'd never known anything but victory, which, Paul realized, could be a weakness in itself. He put that thought aside for later consideration in his own training program. "I have a message for you to carry to the Emperor," Paul said, and he couched his words in the ancient formula. "I, a duke of a great house, an imperial kinsman, give my word of bond under the convention. If the Emperor and his people lay down their arms and come to me here, I will guard their lives with my own." Paul held up his left hand with the ducal signet for the Sardaukar to see. "I swear it by this." The man wet his lips with his tongue, glanced at Gurney. "Yes," Paul said, "who but an Atreides could command the allegiance of Gurney Halleck?" "I will carry the message," the Sardaukar said. "Take him to our forward command post and send him in," Paul said. "Yes, my lord." Gurney motioned for the guard to obey and led them out. Paul turned back to Stilgar. "Johnny and your mother have arrived," Stilgar said. "Johnny has asked time to be alone with her grief. The Reverend Mother sought a moment in the weirding room, I know not why." "My mother's sick with longing for a planet she may never see," Paul said, "where water falls from the sky, and plants grow so thickly you cannot walk between them." "Water from the sky," Stilgar whispered. In that instant, Paul saw how Stilgar had been transformed from the Fremen Naib to a creature of the Lisan al-Gaib, a receptacle for awe and obedience. It was a lessening of the man, and Paul felt the ghost wind of the jihad in it. "I have seen a friend become a worshipper," he thought. In a rush of loneliness, Paul glanced around the room, noting how proper and on review his guards had become in his presence. He sensed the subtle, prideful competition among them, each hoping for notice from Muad'Dib. "Muad'Dib, from whom all blessings flow," he thought. And it was the bitterest thought of his life. "They sense that I must take the throne," he thought. "But they cannot know I do it to prevent the jihad." Stilgar cleared his throat, said, "Rabban too is dead." Paul nodded. Guards to the right suddenly snapped aside, standing at attention to open an aisle for Jessica. She wore her black abba and walked with a hint of striding across sand, but Paul noted how this house had restored to her something of what she had once been here. Concubine to a ruling duke. Her presence carried some of its old assertiveness. Jessica stopped in front of Paul, looked down at him. She saw his fatigue and how he hid it, but found no compassion for him. It was as though she had been rendered incapable of any emotion for her son. Jessica had entered the great hall wondering why the place refused to fit itself snugly into her memories. It remained a foreign room, as though she had never walked here with her beloved Leto, never confronted a drunken Duncan Idaho here, never. There should be a word tension directly opposite to Adab, the demanding memory, she thought. There should be a word for memories that deny themselves. "Where is Alia?" she asked. "Out doing what any good Fremen child should be doing in such times," Paul said. "She's killing enemy wounded and marking their bodies for the water recovery teams." "Paul, you must understand that she does this out of kindness," he said. "Isn't it odd how we misunderstand the hidden unity of kindness and cruelty?" Jessica glared at her son, shocked by the profound change in him. Was it his child's death did this? She wondered. And she said, "The men tell strange stories of you, Paul. They say you've all the powers of the legend. Nothing can be hidden from you, that you see where others cannot see." "A Bene Gesserit should ask about legends?" he asked. I've had a hand in whatever you are, she admitted, but you mustn't expect me to. How would you like to live billions upon billions of lives? Paul asked. There's a fabric of legends for you. Think of all those experiences, the wisdom they'd bring. But wisdom tempers love, doesn't it? And it puts a new shape on hate. How can you tell what's ruthless unless you've plumbed the depths of both cruelty and kindness? You should fear me, Mother. I am the Kwisatz Haderach. Jessica tried to swallow in a dry throat. Presently she said, Once you denied to me that you were the Kwisatz Haderach. Paul shook his head. I can deny nothing anymore. He looked up into her eyes. The Emperor and his people come now. They will be announced any moment. Stand beside me. I wish a clear view of them. My future bride will be among them. Paul, Jessica snapped, don't make the mistake your father made. She's a princess, Paul said. She's my key to the throne. And that's all she'll ever be. Mistake? You think because I'm what you made me that I cannot feel the need for revenge? Even on the innocent? She asked, and she thought, he must not make the mistakes I made. There are no innocent anymore, Paul said. Tell that to Chani, Jessica said, and gestured toward the passage from the rear of the residency. Chani entered the great hall there, walking between the Fremen guards as though unaware of them. Her hood and stillsuit cap were thrown back, face mask fastened aside. She walked with a fragile uncertainty as she crossed the room to stand beside Jessica. Paul saw the marks of tears on her cheeks. She gives water to the dead. He felt a pang of grief strike through him, but it was as though he could only feel this thing through Chani's presence. He is dead, beloved, Chani said. Our son is dead. Holding himself under stiff control, Paul got to his feet. He reached out, touched Chani's cheek, feeling the dampness of her tears. He cannot be replaced, Paul said. But there will be other sons. It is Usul who promises this. Gently he moved her aside, gestured to Stilgar. More deep, Stilgar said. They come from the ship, the Emperor and his people, Paul said. I will stand here. Assemble the captives in an open space in the center of the room. They will be kept at a distance of 10 meters from me unless I command otherwise. As you command, Muad'Dib. As Stilgar turned to obey, Paul heard the awed muttering of Fremen guards. You see, he knew. No one told him, but he knew. The Emperor's entourage could be heard approaching now, his Sardaukar humming one of their marching tunes to keep up their spirits. There came a murmur of voices at the entrance, and Gurney Halleck passed through the guard, crossed to confer with Stilgar, then moved to Paul's side, a strange look in his eyes. Will I lose Gurney too? Paul wondered. The way I lost Stilgar, losing a friend to gain a creature? They have no throwing weapons, Gurney said. I've made sure of that myself. He glanced around the room, seeing Paul's preparations. Fade Rautha Harkonnen is with them. Shall I cut him out? Leave him. There are some guild people, too, demanding special privileges, threatening an embargo against Arrakis. I told them I'd give you their message. Let them threaten. Paul, Jessica hissed behind him. He's talking about the guild. I'll pull their fangs presently, Paul said. And he thought then about the guild, the force that had specialized for so long that it had become a parasite, unable to exist independently of the life upon which it fed. They had never dared grasp the sword, and now they could not grasp it. They might have taken Arrakis when they realized the error of specializing on the Melange awareness spectrum narcotic for their navigators. They could have done this, lived their glorious day, and died. Instead, They'd existed from moment to moment, hoping the seas in which they swam might produce a new host when the old one died. The guild navigators, gifted with limited prescience, had made a fatal decision. They'd chosen always the clear, safe course that leads ever downward into stagnation. Let them look closely at their new host, Paul thought. There's also a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother who says she's a friend of your mother, Gurney said. My mother has no Bene Gesserit friends. Again, Gurney glanced around the great hall, then bent close to Paul's ear. Thufir Hawat's with him, my lord. I had no chance to see him alone, but he used our old hand signs to say he's been working with the Harkonnens, thought you were dead, says he's to be left among him. You left Thufir among those? He wanted it. And I thought it best, if there's something wrong, he's where we can control him. If not, we've an ear on the other side. Paul thought then of prescient glimpses into the possibilities of this moment. And one timeline where Thufir carried a poisoned needle which the Emperor commanded he use against this upstart duke. The entrance guard stepped aside, formed a short corridor of lances. There came a murmurous swish of garments, feet rasping the sand that had drifted into the residency. The Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV led his people into the hall. His Burseg helmet had been lost, and the red hair stood out in disarray. His uniform's left sleeve had been ripped along the inner seam. He was beltless and without weapons. But his presence moved with him like a force shield bubble that kept his immediate area open. A Fremen lance dropped across his path, stopped him where Paul had ordered. The others bunched up behind, a montage of color, of shuffling and of staring faces. Paul swept his gaze across the group, saw women who hid signs of weeping, saw the lackeys who had come to enjoy grandstand seats at a Sardaukar victory and now stood choked to silence by defeat. Paul saw the bird-bright eyes of the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohim glaring beneath her black hood, and beside her the narrow furtiveness of Phaedratha Harkonnen. There's a face time betrayed to me, Paul thought. He looked beyond Phaedratha then, attracted by a movement, seeing there a narrow, weaselish face he'd never before encountered, not in time or out of it. It was a face he felt he should know, and the feeling carried with it a marker of fear. Why should I fear that man? He wondered. He leaned toward his mother, whispered, That man to the left of the Reverend Mother, the evil-looking one, who is that? Jessica looked, recognizing the face from her duke's dossiers. Count Fenring, she said. The one who was here immediately before us, a genetic eunuch and a killer. The Emperor's errand boy, Paul thought. And the thought was a shock crashing across his consciousness because he had seen the Emperor in uncounted associations spread through the possible futures, but never once had Count Fenring appeared within those prescient visions. It occurred to Paul then that he had seen his own dead body along countless reaches of the time web, but never once had he seen his moment of death. Have I been denied a glimpse of this man because he is the one who kills me? Paul wondered. The thought sent a pang of foreboding through him. He forced his attention away from Fenring, looked now at the remnants of Sardaukar men and officers, the bitterness on their faces and the desperation. Here and there among them, faces caught Paul's attention briefly, Sardaukar officers measuring their preparations within this room, planning and scheming yet for a way to turn defeat into victory. Paul's attention came at last to a tall, blonde woman, green-eyed, a face of patrician beauty, classic in its hauteur, untouched by tears, completely undefeated. Without being told it, Paul knew her. Princess Royal, Bene Gesserit trained, a face that time vision had shown him in many aspects. Irulan. There's my key, he thought. Then he saw movement in the clustered people. A face and figure emerged. Thufir Hawat. The seamed old features with darkly stained lips, the hunched shoulders, the look of fragile age about him. There's Thufir Hawat, Paul said. Let him stand free, Gurney. My lord, Gurney said. Let him stand free, Paul repeated. Gurney nodded. Hawat shambled forward as a Fremen lance was lifted and replaced behind him. The rheumy eyes peered at Paul, measuring, seeking. Paul stepped forward one pace, sensed the tense, waiting movement of the Emperor and his people. Hawat's gaze stabbed past Paul, and the old man said, Lady Jessica, I but learned this day how I wronged you in my thoughts. You needn't forgive. Paul waited, but his mother remained silent. Thufir, old friend, Paul said. As you can see, my back is toward no door. The universe is full of doors, Hawat said. Am I my father's son? Paul asked. More like your grandfather's, Hawat rasped. You've his manner, and the look of him in your eyes. Yet I am my father's son, Paul said. For I say to you, Thufir, that in payment for your years of service to my family, you may now ask anything you wish of me. Anything at all. Do you need my life now, Thufir? It is yours. Paul stepped forward a pace, hands at his side, seeing the look of awareness grow in Hawat's eyes. He realizes that I know of the treachery, Paul thought. Pitching his voice to carry in a half-whisper for Hawat's ears alone, Paul said, I mean this, Thufir. If you're to strike me, do it now. I but wanted to stand before you once more, my Duke, Hawat said. And Paul became aware for the first time of the effort the old man exerted to keep from falling. Paul reached out, supported Hawat by the shoulders, feeling the muscle tremors beneath his hands. Is there pain, old friend? Paul asked. There is pain, my Duke, Hawat agreed. But the pleasure is greater. He half-turned in Paul's arms, extended his left hand, palm up toward the Emperor, exposing the tiny needle cupped against his fingers. See, Majesty, he called. See your traitor's needle. Did you think that I, who've given my life to service of the Atreides, would give them less now? Paul staggered as the old man sagged in his arms, felt the death there, the utter flaccidity. Gently, Paul lowered Hawat to the floor, straightened and signed for guardsmen to carry the body away. Silence held the hall while his command was obeyed. A look of deadly waiting held the Emperor's face now. Eyes that had never admitted fear admitted it at last. Majesty, Paul said, and noted the jerk of surprised attention in the tall Princess Royal. The words had been uttered with the Bene Gesserit-controlled atonals, carrying in it every shade of contempt and scorn that Paul could put there. Bene Gesserit trained indeed, Paul thought. The Emperor cleared his throat, said, Perhaps my respected kinsman believes he has things all his own way now. Nothing could be more remote from fact. You have violated the convention, used atomics against... I used atomics against a natural feature of the desert, Paul said. It was in my way, and I was in a hurry to get to you, Majesty. to ask your explanation for some of your strange activities. There's a massed armada of the great houses in space over Arrakis right now, the Emperor said. I've but to say the word and they'll... Oh, yes, Paul said. I almost forgot about them. He searched through the Emperor's suite until he saw the faces of the two guildsmen. Spoke aside to Gurney. Are those the guild agents, Gurney, the two fat ones dressed in grey over there? Yes, my lord. You too, Paul said, pointing. Get out of there immediately and dispatch messages that will get that fleet on its way home. After this, you'll ask my permission before... The guild doesn't take your orders, the taller of the two barked. He and his companion pushed through to the barrier lances, which were raised at a nod from Paul. The two men stepped out, and the taller leveled an arm at Paul, said, You may very well be under embargo for your... If I hear any more nonsense from either of you, Paul said, I'll give the order that'll destroy all spice production on Arrakis, forever. Are you mad? The tall guildsman demanded. He fell back half a step. You grant that I have the power to do this thing, then? Paul asked. The guildsmen seemed to stare into space for a moment, then, Yes, you could do it, but you must not. Ah, Paul said, and nodded to himself. Guild navigators, both of you, eh? Yes, the shorter of the pair said. You would blind yourself, too, and condemn us all to slow death. Have you any idea what it means to be deprived of the spice liquor once you're addicted? The eye that looks ahead to the safe course is closed forever, Paul said. The guild is crippled. Humans become little isolated clusters on their isolated planets. You know, I might do this thing out of pure spite. Or out of ennui. Let us talk this over privately, the taller guildsman said. I'm sure we can come to some compromise, that is, send the message to your people over Arrakis, Paul said. I grow tired of this argument. If that fleet over us doesn't leave soon, there'll be no need for us to talk. He nodded toward his communications men at the side of the hall. You may use our equipment. First we must discuss this, the tall guildsman said. We cannot just do it, Paul barked. The power to destroy a thing is the absolute control over it. You've agreed I have that power. We are not here to discuss or to negotiate or to compromise. You will obey my orders or suffer the immediate consequences. He means it, the shorter guildsman said. And Paul saw the fear grip him. Slowly, the two crossed to the Fremen communications equipment. Will they obey? Gurney asked. They have a narrow vision of time, Paul said. They can see ahead to a blank wall marking the consequences of disobedience. Every guild navigator on every ship over us can look ahead to that same wall. They'll obey. Paul turned back to look at the Emperor, said, When they permitted you to mount your father's throne, it was only on the assurance that you'd keep the spice flowing. You've failed them, Majesty. Do you know the consequences? Nobody permitted me to stop playing the fool, Paul barked. The guild is like a village beside a river. They need the water, but can only dip out what they require. They cannot dam the river and control it because that focuses attention on what they take. It brings down eventual destruction. The spice flow, that's their river. And I have built a dam. But my dam is such that you cannot destroy it without destroying the river. The Emperor brushed a hand through his red hair, glanced at the backs of the two guildsmen. Even your Bene Gesserit truthsayer is trembling, Paul said. There are other poisons the Reverend Mothers can use for their tricks, but once they've used the spice liquor, the others no longer work. The old woman pulled her shapeless black robes around her, pressed forward out of the crowd to stand at the barrier lances. Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, Paul said. It has been a long time since Caladan, hasn't it? She looked past him at his mother, said, Well, Jessica, I see that your son is indeed the one. For that you can be forgiven even the abomination of your daughter. Paul stilled a cold, piercing anger, said, You've never had the right or cause to forgive my mother anything. The old woman locked eyes with him. Try your tricks on me, old witch, Paul said. Where's your gamja bar? Try looking into that place where you dare not look. You'll find me there staring out at you. The old woman dropped her gaze. Have you nothing to say? Paul demanded. I welcomed you to the ranks of humans, she muttered. Don't besmirch that. Paul raised his voice. Observe her, comrades. This is a Bene Gesserit Reverend Mother, patient in a patient cause. She could wait with her sisters 90 generations for the proper combination of genes and environment to produce the one person their schemes required. Observe her. She knows now that the 90 generations have produced that person. Here I stand. But I will never do her bidding. Jessica, the old woman screamed. Silence him. Silence him yourself, Jessica said. Paul glared at the old woman. For your part in all this, I could gladly have you strangled, he said. You couldn't prevent it. He snapped as she stiffened in rage. But I think it better punishment that you live out your years, never able to touch me or bend me to a single thing your scheming desires. Jessica, what have you done? The old woman demanded. I'll give you only one thing, Paul said. You saw part of what the race needs, but how poorly you saw it. You think to control human breeding and intermix a select few according to your master plan. How little you understand of what... You mustn't speak of these things, the old woman hissed. Silence, Paul roared. The words seemed to take substance as it twisted through the air between them under Paul's control. The old woman reeled back into the arms of those behind her, face blank with shock at the power with which he had seized her psyche. Jessica, she whispered. Jessica. I remember your Gamja bar, Paul said. You remember mine. I can kill you with a word. The Fremen around the hall glanced knowingly at each other. Did the legend not say, and his word shall carry death eternal to those who stand against righteousness? Paul turned his attention to the tall Princess Royal standing beside her Emperor father. Keeping his eyes focused on her, he said, Majesty, we both know the way out of our difficulty. The Emperor glanced at his daughter, back to Paul. You dare! You! An adventurer without family, a nobody from... You've already admitted who I am, Paul said. Royal kinsman, you said. Let's stop this nonsense. I am your ruler, the Emperor said. Paul glanced at the guild's men standing now at the communications equipment and facing them. One of them nodded. I could force it, Paul said. You will not dare, the Emperor grated. Paul merely stared at him. The Princess Royal put a hand on her father's arm. Father, she said, and her voice was silky soft, soothing. Don't try your tricks on me, the Emperor said. He looked at her. You don't need to do this, daughter. We've other resources that... But here's a man fit to be your son, she said. The old Reverend Mother, her composure regained, forced her way to the Emperor's side, leaned close to his ear and whispered. She pleads your case, Jessica said. Paul continued to look at the golden-haired princess. Aside to his mother, he said, That's Irulan, the oldest, isn't it? Yes. Chani moved up on Paul's other side, said, Do you wish me to leave, Muad'Dib? He glanced at her. Leave? You'll never again leave my side. There's nothing binding between us, Chani said. Paul looked down at her for a silent moment, then, "Speak only truth with me, MACINTOSH." As she started to reply, he silenced her with a finger to her lips. "That which binds us cannot be loosed," he said. "Now, watch these matters closely, for I wish to see this room later through your wisdom." The Emperor and his truthsayer were carrying on a heated, low-voiced argument. Paul spoke to his mother. She reminds him that it's part of their agreement to place a Bene Gesserit on the throne, and Irulan is the one they've groomed for it. "Was that their plan?" Jessica said. "Isn't it obvious?" Paul asked. "I see the signs," Jessica snapped. "My question was meant to remind you that you should not try to teach me those matters in which I instructed you." Paul glanced at her, caught a cold smile on her lips. Gurney Halleck leaned between them, said, "I remind you, my lord, that there's a Harkonnen in that bunch." He nodded toward the dark-haired Fade Rautha pressed against a barrier lance on the left. "The one with the squinting eyes there on the left. As evil a face as I ever saw. You promised me once that—" "Thank you, Gurney," Paul said. "It's the Baron. Baron now that the old man's dead," Gurney said. "He'll do for what I've been—" "Can you take him, Gurney?" "My lord jests." "That argument between the Emperor and his witch has gone on long enough, don't you think, Mother?" She nodded. "Indeed." Paul raised his voice, called out to the Emperor, "Majesty, is there a Harkonnen among you?" Royal disdain revealed itself in the way the Emperor turned to look at Paul. "I believe my entourage has been placed under the protection of your ducal word," he said. "My question was for information only," Paul said. "I wish to know if a Harkonnen is officially a part of your entourage, or if a Harkonnen is merely hiding behind a technicality out of cowardice." The Emperor's smile was calculating. "Anyone accepted into the Imperial Company is a member of my entourage." "You have the word of a duke," Paul said. "But Muad'Dib is another matter. He may not recognize your definition of what constitutes an entourage. My friend Gurney Halleck wishes to kill a Harkonnen. If he—" "Canley!" Fade Rautha shouted. He pressed against the barrier lance. "Your father named this vendetta, Atreides. You call me coward while you hide among your women and offer to send a lackey against me." The old truthsayer whispered something fiercely into the Emperor's ear, but he pushed her aside, said, "Canley, is it? There are strict rules for Canley." "Paul, put a stop to this," Jessica said. "My lord," Gurney said, "you promised me my day against the Harkonnens." "You've had your day against them," Paul said, and he felt a harlequin abandon take over his emotions. He slipped his robe and hood from his shoulders, handed them to his mother with his belt and crysknife, began unstrapping his stillsuit. He sensed now that the universe focused on this moment. "There's no need for this," Jessica said. "There are easier ways, Paul." Paul stepped out of his stillsuit, slipped the crysknife from its sheath in his mother's hand. "I know," he said. "Poison, an assassin, all the old familiar ways." "You promised me a Harkonnen," Gurney hissed, and Paul marked the rage in the man's face. The way the inkvine scar stood out dark and ridged. "You owe it to me, my lord." "Have you suffered more from them than I?" Paul asked. "My sister," Gurney rasped. "My years in the slave pits." "My father," Paul said. "My good friends and companions, Thufir Hawat and Duncan Idaho, my years as a fugitive without rank or succor, and one more thing. It is now, Canley, and you know as well as I the rules that must prevail." Halleck's shoulders sagged. "My lord, if that swine... He's no more than a beast you'd spurn with your foot and discard the shoe because it had been contaminated. Call in an executioner if you must, or let me do it, but don't offer yourself to—" "Muad'Dib need not do this thing," Chani said. He glanced at her, saw the fear for him in her eyes. "But the Duke Paul must," he said. This is a Harkonnen animal, Gurney rasped. Paul hesitated on the point of revealing his own Harkonnen ancestry. Stopped at a sharp look from his mother, said merely, "But this being has human shape, Gurney, and deserves human doubt." Gurney said, "If he so much as—" "Please stand aside," Paul said. He hefted the crysknife, pushed Gurney gently aside. "Gurney," Jessica said. She touched Gurney's arm. "He's like his grandfather in this mood. Don't distract him. It's the only thing you can do for him now." And she thought, "Great mother, what irony." The Emperor was studying Feyd-Rautha, seeing the heavy shoulders, the thick muscles. He turned to look at Paul, a stringy whipcord of a youth. Not as desiccated as the Arakeen natives, but with ribs there to count, and sunken in the flanks so that the ripple and gather of muscles could be followed under the skin. Jessica leaned close to Paul, pitched her voice for his ears alone. "One thing, son. Sometimes a dangerous person is prepared by the Bene Gesserit, a word implanted into the deepest recesses by the old pleasure-paying methods. The word sound most frequently used is Uroshnor. If this one's been prepared, as I strongly suspect, that word uttered in his ear will render his muscles flaccid and—" "I want no special advantage for this one," Paul said. "Step back out of my way." Gurney spoke to her. "Why is he doing this? Does he think to get himself killed and achieve martyrdom? This Fremen religious prattle, is that what clouds his reason?" Jessica hid her face in her hands, realizing that she didn't know fully why Paul took this course. She could feel death in the room and knew that the changed Paul was capable of such a thing as Gurney suggested. Every talent within her focused on the need to protect her son, but there was nothing she could do. "Is it this religious prattle?" Gurney insisted. "Be silent," Jessica whispered, "and pray." The Emperor's face was touched by an abrupt smile. "If Feyd-Rautha Harkonnen, of my entourage, so wishes," he said, "I relieve him of all restraint and give him freedom to choose his own course in this." The Emperor waved a hand toward Paul's Fedaykin guards. "One of your rabble has my belt and short blade. If Feyd-Rautha wishes it, he may meet you with my blade in his hand." "I wish it," Feyd-Rautha said, and Paul saw the elation on the man's face. He's overconfident, Paul thought. There's a natural advantage I can accept. "Get the Emperor's blade," Paul said, and watched as his command was obeyed. "Put it on the floor there." He indicated a place with his foot. "Clear the Imperial rabble back against the wall and let the Harkonnen stand clear." A flurry of robes, scraping of feet, low-voiced commands and protests accompanied obedience to Paul's command. The guildsmen remained standing near the communications equipment. They frowned at Paul in obvious indecision. They're accustomed to seeing the future, Paul thought. In this place and time they're blind, even as I am. And he sampled the time winds, sensing the turmoil, the storm nexus that now focused on this moment place. Even the faint gaps were closed now. Here was the unborn jihad he knew. He was the race consciousness that he had known once as his own terrible purpose. Here was reason enough for a Kwisatz Haderach or a Lisan al-Gaib or even the halting schemes of the Bene Gesserit. The race of humans had felt its own dormancy, sensed itself grown stale, and knew now only the need to experience turmoil in which the genes would mingle and the strong new mixtures survive. All humans were alive as an unconscious, single organism in this moment, experiencing a kind of sexual heat that could override any barrier. And Paul saw how futile were any efforts of his to change any smallest bitterness. He had thought to oppose the jihad within himself, but the jihad would be. His legions would rage out from Arrakis even without him. They needed only the legend he already had become. He had shown them the way. given them mastery even over the guild, which must have the spice to exist. A sense of failure pervaded him, and he saw through it that 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 Harkonnen had slipped out of the torn uniform, stripped down to a fighting girdle with a male core. This is the climax, Paul thought. From here the future will open, the clouds part onto a kind of glory, and if I die here, they'll say I sacrificed myself that my spirit might lead them. And if I live, they'll say nothing can oppose Muad'Dib. Is the Atreides ready? 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 called, using the words of the ancient kindly ritual. Paul chose to answer him in the Fremen way. May thy knife chip and shatter. He pointed to the Emperor's blade on the floor, indicating that 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 should advance and take it. Keeping his attention on Paul, 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 picked up the knife, balancing it a moment in his hand to get the feel of it. Excitement kindled in him. This was a fight he had dreamed about, man against man, skill against skill, with no shields intervening. He could see a way to power opening before him, because the Emperor surely would reward whoever killed this troublesome duke. The reward might even be that haughty daughter and a share of the throne. And this yokel duke, this back-world adventurer, could not possibly be a match for a Harkonnen trained in every device and every treachery by 1,000 arena combats. And the yokel had no way of knowing he faced more weapons than a knife here. Let us see if you're proof against poison, 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 thought. He saluted Paul with the Emperor's blade, said, Meet your death, fool! Shall we fight, cousin? Paul asked. And he cat-footed forward, eyes on the waiting blade, his body crouched low with his own milk-white crysknife pointing out as though an extension of his arm. They circled each other, bare feet grating on the floor, watching with eyes intent for the slightest opening. How beautifully you dance, 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 said. He's a talker, Paul thought. There's another weakness. He grows uneasy in the face of silence. Have you been shriven? 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 asked. Still Paul circled in silence. And the old Reverend Mother, watching the fight from the press of the Emperor's suite, felt herself trembling. The Atreides youth had called the Harkonnen cousin. It could only mean he knew the ancestry they shared, easy to understand because he was the Kwisatz Haderach. But the words forced her to focus on the only thing that mattered to her here. This could be a major catastrophe for the Bene Gesserit breeding scheme. She had seen something of what Paul had seen here, that 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑻𝑨𝑹 might kill but not be victorious. Another thought, though, almost overwhelmed her. Two end products of this long and costly program faced each other in a fight to the death that might easily claim both of them. If both died here, that would leave only 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹's bastard daughter, still a baby, an unknown, an unmeasured factor, and Alia the abomination. Perhaps you have only pagan rites here, 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹 said. Would you like the Emperor's truth-sayer to prepare your spirit for its journey? Paul smiled, circling to the right, alert, his black thoughts suppressed by the needs of the moment. 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹 leaped, feinting with right hand, but with the knife shifted in a blur to his left hand. Paul dodged easily, noting the shield-conditioned hesitation in 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹's thrust. Still, it was not as great a shield conditioning as some Paul had seen, and he sensed that 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹 had fought before against unshielded foes. Does an Atreides run or stand and fight? 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹 asked. Paul resumed his silent circling. Idaho's words came back to him, the words of training from the long-ago practice floor on Caladan. Use the first moments in study. You may miss many an opportunity for quick victory this way, but the moments of study are insurance of success. Take your time, and be sure. Perhaps you think this dance prolongs your life a few moments, 𝑱𝑶𝑵𝑬𝑺𝑚𝑣𝑹 said. Well and good. He stopped the circling, straightened. Paul had seen enough for a first approximation. Feyd-Rautha led to the left side, presenting the right hip as though the mailed fighting girdle could protect his entire side. It was the action of a man trained to the shield and with a knife in both hands. Or... And Paul hesitated. The girdle was more than it seemed. The Harkonnen appeared too confident against a man who this day led the forces of victory against Sardaukar legions. Feyd-Rautha noted the hesitation, said, "Why prolong the inevitable? You but keep me from exercising my rights over this ball of dirt." If it's a flip dart, Paul thought, it's a cunning one. The girdle shows no signs of tampering. "Why don't you speak?" Feyd-Rautha demanded. Paul resumed his probing circle, allowing himself a cold smile at the tone of unease in Feyd-Rautha's voice, evidence that the pressure of silence was building. "You smile, eh?" Feyd-Rautha asked. And he leaped in mid-sentence. Expecting the slight hesitation, Paul almost failed to evade the downflash of blade, felt its tip scratch his left arm. He silenced the sudden pain there, his mind flooded with realization that the earlier hesitation had been a trick, an overfeint. He was more of an opponent than he had expected. There would be tricks within tricks within tricks. "Your own Thufir Hawa taught me some of my skills," Feyd-Rautha said. "He gave me first blood. Too bad the old fool didn't live to see it." And Paul recalled that Idaho had once said, "Expect only what happens in the fight. That way you'll never be surprised."
This ends Disc 19.
Circled each other, crouched, cautious. Paul saw the return of elation to his opponent, wondered at it. Did a scratch signify that much to the man? Unless there were poison on the blade. But how could there be? His own men had handled the weapon, snooped it before passing it. They were too well trained to miss an obvious thing like that. "That woman you were talking to over there," Feyd-Rautha said. "The little one, is she something special to you? A pet, perhaps? Will she deserve my special attentions?" Paul remained silent, probing with his inner senses, examining the blood from the wound, finding a trace of soporific from the Emperor's blade. He realigned his own metabolism to match this threat and changed the molecules of the soporific, but he felt a thrill of doubt. They'd been prepared with soporific on a blade. A soporific. Nothing to alert a poison snooper, but strong enough to slow the muscles it touched. His enemies had their own plans within plans, their own stacked treacheries. Again Feyd-Rautha leaped, stabbing. Paul, the smile frozen on his face, fainted with slowness as though inhibited by the drug, and at the last instant dodged to meet the down-flashing arm on the crysknife's point. Feyd-Rautha ducked sideways and was out and away. His blade shifted to his left hand, and the measure of him that only a slight paleness of jaw betrayed the acid pain where Paul had cut him. Let him know his own moment of doubt, Paul thought. Let him suspect poison. "Treachery!" Feyd-Rautha shouted. "He's poisoned me! I do feel poison in my arm!" Paul dropped his cloak of silence, said, "Only a little acid to counter the soporific on the Emperor's blade." Feyd-Rautha matched Paul's cold smile, lifted blade in left hand for a mock salute. His eyes glared rage behind the knife. Paul shifted his crysknife to his left hand, matching his opponent. Again they circled, probing. Feyd-Rautha began closing the space between them, edging in, knife held high, anger showing itself in squint of eye and set of jaw. He feinted right and under, and they were pressed against each other, knife hands gripped, straining. Paul, cautious of Feyd-Rautha's right hip where he suspected a poison flip dart, forced the turn to the right. He almost failed to see the needle point flick out beneath the belt line. A shift and a giving in Feyd-Rautha's motion warned him. The tiny point missed Paul's flesh by the barest fraction. On the left hip. Treachery within treachery within treachery, Paul reminded himself. Using Bene Gesserit-trained muscles, he sagged to catch a reflex in Feyd-Rautha, but the necessity of avoiding the tiny point jutting from his opponent's hip threw Paul off just enough that he missed his footing and found himself thrown hard to the floor, Feyd-Rautha on top. "You see it there on my hip?" Feyd-Rautha whispered. "Your death, fool!" And he began twisting himself around, forcing the poisoned needle closer and closer. "It'll stop your muscles, and my knife will finish you. There'll be never a trace left to detect." Paul strained, hearing the silent screams in his mind, his cell-stamped ancestors demanding that he use the secret word to slow Feyd-Rautha, to save himself. "I will not say it," Paul gasped. Feyd-Rautha gaped at him, caught in the merest fraction of hesitation. It was enough for Paul to find the weakness of balance in one of his opponent's leg muscles, and their positions were reversed. Feyd-Rautha lay partly underneath, with right hip high, unable to turn because of the tiny needlepoint caught against the floor beneath him. Paul twisted his left hand free, aided by the lubrication of blood from his arm, thrust once hard up underneath Feyd-Rautha's jaw. The point slid home into the brain. Feyd-Rautha jerked and sagged back, still held partly on his side by the needle embedded in the floor. Breathing deeply to restore his calm, Paul pushed himself away and got to his feet. He stood over the body, knife in hand, raised his eyes with deliberate slowness to look across the room at the Emperor. "Majesty," Paul said, "your force is reduced by one more. Shall we now shed sham and pretense? Shall we now discuss what must be? Your daughter wed to me, and the way opened for an Atreides to sit on the throne." The Emperor turned, looked at Count Fenring. The Count met his stare, grey eyes against green. The thought lay there clearly between them, their associations so long that understanding could be achieved with a glance. "Kill this upstart for me," the Emperor was saying. "The Atreides is young and resourceful, yes, but he is also tired from long effort, and he'd be no match for you anyway. Call him out now. You know the way of it. Kill him." Slowly, Fenring moved his head, a prolonged turning until he faced Paul. "Do it," the Emperor hissed. The Count focused on Paul, seeing with eyes his Lady Margot had trained in the Bene Gesserit way, aware of the mystery and hidden grandeur about this Atreides youth. "I could kill him," Fenring thought, and he knew this for a truth. Something in his own secretive depths stayed the Count then, and he glimpsed briefly, inadequately, the advantage he held over Paul, a way of hiding from the youth, a furtiveness of person and motives that no eye could penetrate. Paul, aware of some of this from the way the time nexus boiled, understood at last why he had never seen Fenring along the webs of prescience. Fenring was one of the might-have-beens, an almost Kwisatz Haderach, crippled by a flaw in the genetic pattern, a eunuch, his talent concentrated into furtiveness and inner seclusion. A deep compassion for the Count flowed through Paul, the first sense of brotherhood he'd ever experienced. Fenring, reading Paul's emotion, said, "Majesty, I must refuse." Rage overcame Shaddam IV. He took 2 short steps through the entourage, cuffed Fenring viciously across the jaw. A dark flush spread up and over the Count's face. He looked directly at the Emperor, spoke with deliberate lack of emphasis. "We have been friends, Majesty. What I do now is out of friendship. I shall forget that you struck me." Paul cleared his throat, said, "We were speaking of the throne, Majesty." The Emperor whirled, glared at Paul. "I sit on the throne," he barked. "You shall have a throne, on Salusa Secundus," Paul said. "I put down my arms and came here on your word of bond," the Emperor shouted. "You dare threaten—" "Your person is safe in my presence," Paul said. "And Atreides promised it. Muad'Dib, however, sentences you to your prison planet. But have no fear, Majesty. I will ease the harshness of the place with all the powers at my disposal. It shall become a garden world full of gentle things." As the hidden import of Paul's words grew in the Emperor's mind, he glared across the room at Paul. "Now we see true motives," he sneered. "Indeed," Paul said. "And what of Arrakis?" the Emperor asked. "Another garden world full of gentle things?" "The Fremen have the word of Muad'Dib," Paul said. "There will be flowing water here open to the sky and green oases rich with good things. But we have the spice to think of too. Thus there will always be desert on Arrakis, and fierce winds, and trials to toughen a man. We Fremen have a saying, God created Arrakis to train the faithful. One cannot go against the word of God." The old truthsayer, the Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, had her own view of the hidden meaning in Paul's words now. She glimpsed the jihad and said, "You cannot loose these people upon the universe." "You will think back to the gentle ways of the Sardaukar," Paul snapped. "You cannot," she whispered. "You're a truthsayer," Paul said. "Review your words." He glanced at the Princess Royal, back to the Emperor. "Best be done quickly, Majesty." The Emperor turned a stricken look upon his daughter. She touched his arm, spoke soothingly. "For this I was trained, Father." He took a deep breath. "You cannot stay this thing," the old truthsayer muttered. The Emperor straightened, standing stiffly with a look of remembered dignity. "Who will negotiate for you, kinsman?" he asked. Paul turned, saw his mother, her eyes heavy-lidded, standing with Chani in a squad of Fedaykin guards. He crossed to them, stood looking down at Chani. "I know the reasons," Chani whispered. "If it must be, Usul." Paul, hearing the secret tears in her voice, touched her cheek. "My Sihaya need fear nothing, ever," he whispered. He dropped his arm, faced his mother. "You will negotiate for me, Mother, with Chani by your side. She has wisdom and sharp eyes. And it is wisely said that no one bargains tougher than a Fremen. She will be looking through the eyes of her love for me, and with the thought of her sons-to-be, what they will need. Listen to her." Jessica sensed the harsh calculation in her son, put down a shudder. "What are your instructions?" she asked. The Emperor's entire Chom Company holdings as dowry, he said. Entire? She was shocked, almost speechless. He is to be stripped. I'll want an earldom and Chom directorship for Gurney Halleck, and him in the fief of Caladan. There will be titles and attendant power for every surviving Atreides man, not excepting the lowliest trooper. What of the Fremen? Jessica asked. The Fremen are mine, Paul said. What they receive shall be dispensed by Muad'Dib. It'll begin with Stilgar as governor on Arrakis, but that can wait. And for me? Jessica asked. Is there something you wish? Perhaps Caladan, she said, looking at Gurney. I'm not certain. I've become too much the Fremen and the Reverend Mother. I need a time of peace and stillness in which to think. That you shall have, Paul said, and anything else that Gurney or I can give you. Jessica nodded, feeling suddenly old and tired. She looked at Chani. And for the royal concubine? No title for me, Chani whispered. Nothing, I beg of you. Paul stared down into her eyes, remembering her suddenly as she had stood once with little Leto in her arms, their child now dead in this violence. I swear to you now, he whispered, that you'll need no title. That woman over there will be my wife, and you but a concubine, because this is a political thing, and we must weld peace out of this moment. Enlist the great houses of the Lancerot. We must obey the forms, yet that princess shall have no more of me than my name. No child of mine, nor touch, nor softness of glance, nor instant of desire. So you say now, Chani said. She glanced across the room at the tall princess. Do you know so little of my son? Jessica whispered. See that princess standing there, so haughty and confident. They say she has pretensions of a literary nature. Let us hope she finds solace in such things. She'll have little else. A bitter laugh escaped Jessica. Think on it, Chani. That princess will have the name, yet she'll live as less than a concubine, never to know a moment of tenderness from the man to whom she's bound. While we, Chani, we who carry the name of concubine, history will call us wives.
The end. You've been listening to Dune by Frank Herbert, narrated by George Guidall, with Davina Porter as Princess Irulan. From a very young age, Frank Herbert knew he wanted to be a writer. Before devoting his full attention to his novels, he spent some 30 years as a newspaper editor and reporter in various locales on the West Coast. He continued in this profession even after the success of Dune in 1965. In addition, Frank Herbert also engaged in study and special research into psychology, arid lands, photography, ecology, alternative energies, and education. He is the author of over 20 books in addition to the Dune series. He died in 1986. Recorded Books would like to thank his son Brian Herbert for his assistance with the pronunciations in this book. The following are 3 appendices included by Frank Herbert on the ecology and religion of Dune and the motives of the Bene Gesserit.
Appendix 1. The ecology of Dune. Beyond a critical point within a finite space, freedom diminishes as numbers increase. This is as true of humans in the finite space of a planetary ecosystem as it is of gas molecules in a sealed flask. The human question is not how many can possibly survive within the system, but what kind of existence is possible for those who do survive. Kynes, first planetologist of Arrakis. The effect of Arrakis on the mind of the newcomer usually is that of overpowering barren land. The stranger might think nothing could live or grow in the open here, that this was the true wasteland that had never been fertile and never would be. To Kynes, the planet was merely an expression of energy, a machine being driven by its sun. What it needed was reshaping to fit it to man's needs. His mind went directly to the free-moving human population, the Fremen. What a challenge! What a tool they could be! Fremen, an ecological and geological force of almost unlimited potential. A direct and simple man in many ways, Kynes. One must evade Harkonnen restrictions? Excellent, then one marries a Fremen woman. When she gives you a Fremen son, you begin with him, with Liet Kynes and the other children, teaching them ecological literacy, creating a new language with symbols that arm the mind to manipulate an entire landscape, its climate, seasonal limits, and finally, to break through all ideas of force into the dazzling awareness of order. There's an internally recognized beauty of motion and balance on any man-healthy planet, Kynes said. You see in this beauty a dynamic, stabilizing effect essential to all life. Its aim is simple, to maintain and produce coordinated patterns of greater and greater diversity. Life improves the closed system's capacity to sustain life. Life, all life, is in the service of life. Necessary nutrients are made available to life by life in greater and greater richness as the diversity of life increases. The entire landscape comes alive, filled with relationships and relationships within relationships. This was Kynes lecturing to a Sietch-Warren class. Before the lectures, though, he had to convince the Fremen. To understand how this came about, you must first understand the enormous single-mindedness, the innocence with which he approached any problem. He was not naive, he merely permitted himself no distractions. He was exploring the Arrakis landscape in a one-man ground car one hot afternoon when he stumbled onto a deplorably common scene. 6 Harkonnen bravos, shielded and fully armed, had trapped 3 Fremen youths in the open behind the shield wall near the village of Windsack. To Kynes, it was a ding-dong battle, more slapstick than real, until he focused on the fact that the Harkonnens intended to kill the Fremen. By this time, one of the youths was down with a severed artery. 2 of the bravos were down as well, but it was still 4 armed men against 2 striplings. Kynes wasn't brave. He merely had that single-mindedness and caution. The Harkonnens were killing Fremen. They were destroying the tools with which he intended to remake a planet. He triggered his own shield, waded in, and had 2 of the Harkonnens dead with a slip tip before they knew anyone was behind them. He dodged a sword thrust from one of the others, slit the man's throat with a neat entresure, and left the lone remaining bravo to the 2 Fremen youths, turning his full attention to saving the lad on the ground. And save the lad he did, while the 6th Harkonnen was being dispatched. Now here was a pretty kettle of sand trout. The Fremen didn't know what to make of Kynes. They knew who he was, of course. No man arrived on Arrakis without a full dossier finding its way into the Fremen strongholds. They knew him. He was an imperial servant. But he killed Harkonnens. Adults might have shrugged and, with some regret, sent his shade to join those of the 6 dead men on the ground. But these Fremen were inexperienced youths, and all they could see was that they owed this imperial servant a mortal obligation. Kynes wound up 2 days later in a sietch that looked down on Wind Pass. To him it was all very natural. He talked to the Fremen about water, about dunes anchored by grass, about palmeries filled with date palms, about open qanats flowing across the desert. He talked and talked and talked. All around him raged a debate that Kynes never saw. What to do with this madman? He knew the location of a major sietch. What to do? What of his words, this mad talk about a paradise on Arrakis? Just talk. He knows too much. But he killed Harkonnens. What of the water burden? When did we owe the Imperium anything? He killed Harkonnens. Anyone can kill Harkonnens. I have done it myself. But what of this talk about the flowering of Arrakis? Very simple. Where is the water for this? He says it is here, and he did save 3 of ours. He saved 3 fools who had put themselves in the way of the Harkonnen fist, and he has seen crysknives. The necessary decision was known for hours before it was voiced. The Tao of a Sietch tells its members what they must do. Even the most brutal necessity is known. An experienced fighter was sent with a consecrated knife to do the job. 2 watermen followed him to get the water from the body. Brutal necessity. It's doubtful that Kynes even focused on his would-be executioner. He was talking to a group that spread around him at a cautious distance. He walked as he talked, a short circle, gesturing. Open water, Kynes said. Walk in the open without still suits. Water for dipping it out of a pond. Portugals. The knife man confronted him. Remove yourself, Kynes said, and went on talking about secret wind traps. He brushed past the man. Kynes' back stood open for the ceremonial blow. What went on in that would-be executioner's mind cannot be known now. Did he finally listen to Kynes and believe? Who knows? But what he did is a matter of record. Uliet was his name, older Liet. Uliet walked 3 paces and deliberately fell on his own knife, thus removing himself. Suicide? Some say Shai Hulud moved him. Talk about omens. From that instant, Kynes had but to point, saying, "Go there." Entire Fremen tribes went. Men died, women died, children died. But they went. Kynes returned to his imperial chores, directing the biological testing stations, and now Fremen began to appear among the station personnel. The Fremen looked at each other. They were infiltrating the system, a possibility they'd never considered. Station tools began finding their way into the Sietch warrens, especially cutter rays, which were used to dig underground catch basins and hidden wind traps. Water began collecting in the basins. It became apparent to the Fremen that Kynes was not a madman totally, just mad enough to be holy. He was one of the Ummah, the Brotherhood of Prophets. The shade of Uliet was advanced to the Sedus, the throng of heavenly judges. Kynes, direct, savagely intent Kynes, knew that highly organized research is guaranteed to produce nothing new. He set up small unit experiments with regular interchange of data for a swift Tansley effect, let each group find its own path. They must accumulate millions of tiny facts. He organized only isolated and rough run-through tests to put their difficulties into perspective. Core samplings were made throughout the bled. Charts were developed on the long drifts of weather that are called climate. He found that in the wide belt contained by the 70-degree lines, north and south, temperatures for thousands of years hadn't gone outside the 254 to 332 degrees absolute range, and that this belt had long growing seasons where temperatures ranged from 284 to 302 degrees absolute, the bonanza range for terraform life, once they solved the water problem. When will we solve it? The Fremen asked. When will we see Arrakis as a paradise? In the manner of a teacher answering a child who has asked the sum of 2 plus 2, Kynes told them, from 300 to 500 years. A lesser folk might have howled in dismay. But the Fremen had learned patience from men with whips. It was a bit longer than they had anticipated, but they all could see that the blessed day was coming. They tightened their sashes and went back to work. Somehow, the disappointment made the prospect of paradise more real. The concern on Arrakis was not with water, but with moisture. Pets were almost unknown, stock animals rare. Some smugglers employed the domesticated desert ass, the kulan, but the water price was high even when the beasts were fitted with modified stillsuits. Kynes thought of installing reduction plants to recover water from the hydrogen and oxygen locked in native rock, but the energy cost factor was far too high. The polar caps, disregarding the false sense of water security they gave the Pions, held far too small an amount for his project, and he already suspected where the water had to be. There was that consistent increase of moisture at median altitudes and in certain winds. There was that primary clue in the air balance, 23% oxygen, 75.4% nitrogen, and 0.023% carbon dioxide, with the trace gases taking up the rest. There was a rare native root plant that grew above the 2,500-meter level in the northern temperate zone. A tuber 2 meters long yielded half a liter of water. And there were the terraform desert plants. The tougher ones showed signs of thriving if planted in depressions lined with dew precipitators. Then, Kynes saw the salt pan. His thopter, flying between stations far out on the bled, was blown off course by a storm. When the storm passed, there was the pan, a giant oval depression some 300 kilometers on a long axis, a glaring white surprise in the open desert. Kynes landed, tasted the pan's storm-cleaned surface. Salt. Now he was certain. There had been open water on Arrakis once. He began re-examining the evidence of the dry wells where trickles of water had appeared and vanished, never to return. Kynes set his newly trained Fremen limnologists to work. Their chief clue, leathery scraps of matter sometimes found with the spice mass after a blow. This had been ascribed to a fictional sand trout in Fremen folk stories. As facts grew into evidence, a creature emerged to explain these leathery scraps, a sand swimmer that blocked off water into fertile pockets within the porous lower strata below the 280-degree absolute line. This water stealer died by the millions in each spice blow. A 5-degree change in temperature could kill it. The few survivors entered a semi-dormant cyst hibernation to emerge in 6 years as small, about 3 meters long, sandworms. Of these, only a few avoided their larger brothers and pre-spice water pockets to emerge into maturity as the giant Shai-Hulud. Water is poisonous to Shai-Hulud, as the Fremen had long known from drowning the rare stunted worm of the minor erg to produce the awareness spectrum narcotic they call water of life. The stunted worm is a primitive form of Shai-Hulud that reaches a length of only about 9 meters. Now they had the circular relationship. Little maker to pre-spice mass. Little maker to Shai-Hulud, Shai-Hulud to scatter the spice upon which fed microscopic creatures called sand plankton. The sand plankton, food for Shai-Hulud, growing, burrowing, becoming little makers. Kynes and his people turned their attention from these great relationships and focused now on microecology. First, the climate. The sand surface often reached temperatures of 344 degrees to 350 degrees absolute. A foot below ground, it might be 55 degrees cooler. A foot above ground, 25 degrees cooler. Leaves or black shade could provide another 18 degrees of cooling. Next, the nutrients. Sand of Arrakis is mostly a product of worm digestion. Dust, the truly omnipresent problem there, is produced by the constant surface creep, the saltation movement of sand. Coarse grains are found on the downwind sides of dunes. The windward side is packed smooth and hard. Old dunes are yellow, oxidized. Young dunes are the color of the parent rock, usually gray. Downwind sides of old dunes provided the first plantation areas. The Fremen aimed first for a cycle of poverty grass with peat-like hair cilia to intertwine, mat, and fix the dunes by depriving the wind of its big weapon, movable grains. Adaptive zones were laid out in the deep south, far from Harkonnen watchers. The mutated poverty grasses were planted first along the downwind slip face of the chosen dunes that stood across the path of the prevailing westerlies. With the downwind face anchored, the windward face grew higher and higher, and the grass was moved to keep pace. Giant sifts, long dunes with sinuous crest of more than 1,500 meters height were produced this way. When barrier dunes reached sufficient height, the windward faces were planted with tougher sword grasses, each structure on a base about 6 times as thick as its height was anchored, fixed. Now they came in with deeper plantings, ephemerals, chenopods, pigweeds, and amaranth to begin. Then Scotch broom, low lupine, vine eucalyptus, the type adapted for Caladan's northern reaches, dwarf tamarisk, shore pine. Then the true desert growths, candelilla, saguaro, and bisnaga, the barrel cactus. Where it would grow, they introduced camel sage, union grass, gobi feather grass, wild alfalfa, burrow bush, sand verbena, evening primrose, incense bush, smoke tree, creosote bush. They turned then to the necessary animal life, burrowing creatures to open the soil and aerate it, kit fox, kangaroo mouse, desert hare, sand terrapin, and the predators to keep them in check, desert hawk, dwarf owl, eagle and desert owl, and insects to fill the niches these couldn't reach, scorpion, centipede, trapdoor spider, the biting wasp and the wormfly, and the desert bat to keep watch on these. Now came the crucial test: date palms, cotton, melons, coffee, medicinals, more than 200 selected food plant types to test and adapt. The thing the ecologically illiterate don't realize about an ecosystem, Kind said, is that it's a system. A system. A system maintains a certain fluid stability that can be destroyed by a misstep in just one niche. A system has order, a flowing from point to point. If something dams that flow, order collapses. The untrained might miss that collapse until it was too late. That's why the highest function of ecology is the understanding of consequences. Had they achieved a system? Kynes and his people watched and waited. The Fremen now knew what he meant by an open-end prediction to 500 years. A report came up from the Palmaries. At the desert edge of the plantings, the sand plankton is being poisoned through interaction with the new forms of life. The reason? Protein incompatibility. Poisonous water was forming there which the Arrakis life would not touch. A barren zone surrounded the plantings, and even Shai Hulud would not invade it. Kynes went down to the Palmaries himself, a 20-thumper trip in a palanquin like a wounded man or reverend mother because he never became a sandrider. He tested the barren zone, it stank to heaven, and came up with a bonus, a gift from Arrakis. The addition of sulfur and fixed nitrogen converted the barren zone to a rich plant bed for terraform life. The plantings could be advanced at will. Does this change the timing, the Fremen asked. Kynes went back to his planetary formulae. Wind-trap figures were fairly secure by then. He was generous with his allowances, knowing he couldn't draw neat lines around ecological problems. A certain amount of plant cover had to be set aside to hold dunes in place, a certain amount for foodstuffs, both human and animal, a certain amount to lock moisture in root systems and to feed water out into surrounding parched areas. They'd mapped the roving cold spots on the open bled by this time. These had to be figured into the formulae. Even Shai Hulud had a place in the charts. He must never be destroyed, else spice wealth would end. But his inner digestive factory, with its enormous concentrations of aldehydes and acids, was a giant source of oxygen. A medium worm, about 200 meters long, discharged into the atmosphere as much oxygen as 10 square kilometers of green-growing photosynthesis surface. He had the Guild to consider. The spice bribe to the Guild for preventing weather satellites and other watchers in the skies of Arrakis already had reached major proportions. Nor could the Fremen be ignored, especially the Fremen with their wind traps and irregular land holdings organized around water supply. The Fremen with their new ecological literacy and their dream of cycling vast areas of Arrakis through a prairie phase into forest cover. From the charts emerged a figure. Kynes reported it. 3%. If they could get 3% of the green plant element on Arrakis involved in forming carbon compounds, they'd have their self-sustaining cycle. But how long, the Fremen demanded? Oh, that, about 350 years. So it was true, As this Ummah had said in the beginning, the thing would not come in the lifetime of any man now living, nor in the lifetime of their grandchildren 8 times removed, but it would come. The work continued, building, planting, digging, training the children. Then Kynes the Ummah was killed in the cave-in at Plaster Basin. By this time his son Liet Kynes was 19, a full Fremen and sandrider who had killed more than 100 Harkonnens. The imperial appointment for which the elder Kynes already had applied in the name of his son was delivered as a matter of course. The rigid class structure of the Vaperror had its well-ordered purpose here. The son had been trained to follow the father. The course had been set by this time. The ecological Fremen were aimed along their way. Liet Kynes had only to watch and nudge and spy upon the Harkonnens, until the day his planet was afflicted by a hero. Appendix 2. The Religion of Dune. Before the coming of Muad'Dib, the Fremen of Arrakis practiced a religion whose roots in the Maometh Sa'ari are there for any scholar to see. Many have traced the extensive borrowings from other religions. The most common example is the Hymn to Water, a direct copy from the Orange Catholic Liturgical Manual, calling for rain clouds which Arrakis had never seen. But there are more profound points of accord between the Kitab al-Ibar of the Fremen and the teachings of Bible, Ilm, and Fiqh. Any comparison of the religious beliefs dominant in the Imperium up to the time of Muad'Dib must start with the major forces which shaped those beliefs. 1. The followers of the 14 sages, whose book was the Orange Catholic Bible, and whose views are expressed in the commentaries and other literature produced by the Commission of Ecumenical Translators, CET. 2. The Bene Gesserit, who privately denied they were a religious order, but who operated behind an almost impenetrable screen of ritual mysticism, and whose training, whose symbolism, organization, and internal teaching methods were almost wholly religious. 3. The agnostic ruling class, including the Guild, for whom religion was a kind of puppet show to amuse the populace and keep it docile, and who believed essentially that all phenomena, even religious phenomena, could be reduced to mechanical explanations. 4. The so-called ancient teachings, including those preserved by the Zen Sunni wanderers from the first, second, and third Islamic movements, the Nava Christianity of Chusuk, the Buddhist-Islamic variants of the types dominant at Lankiveil and Sikun, the blend books of the Mahayana Lankavatara, the Zen Hegiganshu of 3 Delta Pavonis, the Torah and Talmudic Zabur surviving on Salusa Secundus, the pervasive Obeah ritual, the Mu'at Quran with its pure ilm and fiqh preserved among the Pundi rice farmers of Caladan, the Hindu outcroppings found all through the universe in little pockets of insulated pions, and finally, the Butlerian Jihad. There is a fifth force which shaped religious belief, but its effect is so universal and profound that it deserves to stand alone. This is, of course, space travel. And in any discussion of religion, it deserves to be written in capitals: space travel. Mankind's movement through deep space placed a unique stamp on religion during the 110 centuries that preceded the Butlerian Jihad. To begin with, early space travel, although widespread, was largely unregulated, slow, and uncertain. And before the guild monopoly, was accomplished by a hodgepodge of methods. The first space experiences, poorly communicated and subject to extreme distortion, were a wild inducement to mystical speculation. Immediately, space gave a different flavor and sense to ideas of creation. That difference is seen even in the highest religious achievements of the period. All through religion, the feeling of the sacred was touched by anarchy from the outer dark. It was as though Jupiter, in all his descendant forms, retreated into the maternal darkness to be superseded by a female immanence filled with ambiguity and with a face of many terrors. The ancient formulae intertwined, tangled together as they were fitted to the needs of new conquests and new heraldic symbols. It was a time of struggle between beast demons on the one side and the old prayers and invocations on the other. There was never a clear decision. During this period, it was said that Genesis was reinterpreted, permitting God to say, "Increase and multiply, and fill the universe, and subdue it, and rule over all manner of strange beasts and living creatures in the infinite airs, on the infinite earths, and beneath them." It was a time of sorceresses whose powers were real. The measure of them is seen in the fact that they never boasted how they grasped the firebrand. Then came the Butlerian Jihad, 2 generations of chaos. The god of machine logic was overthrown among the masses, and a new concept was raised. Man may not be replaced. Those 2 generations of violence were a thalamic pause for all humankind. Men looked at their gods and their rituals and saw that both were filled with that most terrible of all equations, fear over ambition. Hesitantly, the leaders of religions whose followers had spilled the blood of billions began meeting to exchange views. It was a move encouraged by the Spacing Guild, which was beginning to build its monopoly over all interstellar travel, and by the Bene Gesserit, who were banding the sorceresses. Out of those first ecumenical meetings came 2 major developments. One, the realization that all religions had at least one common commandment: "Thou shalt not disfigure the soul." 2, the commission of ecumenical translators. CET convened on a neutral island of old Earth, spawning ground of the mother religions. They met in the common belief that there exists a divine essence in the universe. Every faith with more than 1 million followers were represented, and they reached a surprisingly immediate agreement on the statement of their common goal. We are here to remove a primary weapon from the hands of disputant religions. That weapon, the claim to possession of the one and only revelation. Jubilation at this sign of profound accord proved premature. For more than a standard year, that statement was the only announcement from CET. Men spoke bitterly of the delay. Troubadours composed witty, biting songs about the 121 old cranks, as the CET delegates came to be called. The name arose from a ribald joke which played on the CET initials and called the delegates Cranks Effing Turners. One of the songs, Brown Repose, has undergone periodic revival and is popular even today. Consider Lays, Brown Repose, and the tragedy in all of those cranks. All those cranks, so lays through all your days. Time has told for Milord Sandwich. Occasional rumors leaked out of the CET sessions. It was said they were comparing texts, and irresponsibly the texts were named. Such rumors inevitably provoked anti-ecumenism riots and, of course, inspired new witticisms. 2 years passed. 3 years. The commissioners, 9 of their original number having died and been replaced, paused to observe formal installation of the replacements and announced they were laboring to produce one book weeding out all the pathological symptoms of the religious past. We are producing an instrument of love to be played in all ways, they said. Many consider it odd that this statement provoked the worst outbreaks of violence against ecumenism. 20 delegates were recalled by their congregations. 1 committed suicide by stealing a space frigate and diving it into the sun. Historians estimate the riots took 80 million lives. That works out to about 6,000 for each world then in the Landsraad League. Considering the unrest of the time, this may not be an excessive estimate, although any pretense to real accuracy in the figure must be just that, pretense. Communication between worlds was at one of its lowest ebbs. The Troubadours, quite naturally, had a field day. A popular musical comedy of the period had one of the CET delegates sitting on a white sand beach beneath a palm tree singing, "For God, woman, and the splendor of love, We dally here sans fears or cares. Troubadour, troubadour, sing another melody for God, woman, and the splendor of love. Riots and comedy are but symptoms of the times, profoundly revealing. They betray the psychological tone, the deep uncertainties, and the striving for something better, plus the fear that nothing would come of it all. The major dams against anarchy in these times were the Embryo Guild, the Bene Gesserit, and the Landsraad, which continued its 2,000-year record of meeting in spite of the severest obstacles. The Guild's part appears clear. They gave free transport for all Landsraad and CET business. The Bene Gesserit role is more obscure. Certainly this is the time in which they consolidated their hold upon the sorceresses, explored the subtle narcotics, developed Prana Bindu training, and conceived the Missionaria Protectiva, that black arm of superstition. But it is also the period that saw the composing of the Litany against fear, and the assembly of the Azhar book, that bibliographic marvel that preserves the great secrets of the most ancient faiths. Ingsley's comment is perhaps the only one possible. Those were times of deep paradox. For almost 7 years, then, CET labored. And as their 7th anniversary approached, they prepared the human universe for a momentous announcement. On that 7th anniversary, they unveiled the Orange Catholic Bible. Here is a work with dignity and meaning, they said. Here is a way to make humanity aware of itself as a total creation of God. The men of CET were likened to archaeologists of ideas, inspired by God and the grandeur of rediscovery. It was said they had brought to light the vitality of great ideals overlaid by the deposits of centuries, that they had sharpened the moral imperatives that come out of a religious conscience. With the OC Bible, CET presented the liturgical manual and the commentaries, in many respects a more remarkable work, not only because of its brevity, less than half the size of the OC Bible, but also because of its candor and blend of self-pity and self-righteousness. The beginning is an obvious appeal to the agnostic rulers. Men, finding no answers to the Sunan, the 10,000 religious questions from the Sharia, now apply their own reasoning. All men seek to be enlightened. Religion is but the most ancient and honorable way in which men have striven to make sense out of God's universe. Scientists seek the lawfulness of events. It is the task of religion to fit man into this lawfulness. In their conclusion, though, the commentaries set a harsh tone that very likely foretold their fate. Much that was called religion has carried an unconscious attitude of hostility toward life. True religion must teach that life is filled with joys pleasing to the eye of God, that knowledge without action is empty. All men must see that the teaching of religion by rules and rote is largely a hoax. The proper teaching is recognized with ease. You can know it without fail because it awakens within you that sensation which tells you this is something you've always known. There was an odd sense of calm as the presses and sugar wire imprinters rolled and the OC Bible spread out through the worlds. Some interpreted this as a sign from God, an omen of unity. But even the CET delegates betrayed the fiction of that calm as they returned to their respective congregations. 18 of them were lynched within 2 months. 53 recanted within the year. The OC Bible was denounced as a work produced by the hubris of reason. It was said that its pages were filled with a seductive interest in logic. Revisions that catered to popular bigotry began appearing. These revisions leaned on accepted symbolisms, cross, crescent, feather rattle, the 12 saints, the thin Buddha, and the like. And it soon became apparent that the ancient superstitions and beliefs had not been absorbed by the new ecumenism. Halloway's label for CET's 7-year effort, galactophasic determinism, was snapped up by eager billions who interpreted the initials GD as God-damned. CET chairman Toure Bomoko, a ulema of the Senzunis and one of the 14 delegates who never recanted, the 14 sages of popular history, appeared to admit finally the CET had erred. "We shouldn't have tried to create new symbols," he said. "We should have realized we weren't supposed to introduce uncertainties into accepted belief, that we weren't supposed to stir up curiosity about God. We are daily confronted by the terrifying instability of all things human, yet we permit our religions to grow more rigid and controlled, more conforming and oppressive. What is this shadow across the highway of divine command? It is a warning that institutions endure, that symbols endure when their meaning is lost, that there is no summa of all attainable knowledge." The bitter double edge in this admission did not escape Bomoko's critics, and he was forced soon afterward to flee into exile. His life depended upon the Guild's pledge of secrecy. He reportedly died on Tupile, honored and beloved. His last words, "Religion must remain an outlet for people who say to themselves, 'I am not the kind of person I want to be.' It must never sink into an assemblage of the self-satisfied." It is pleasant to think that Bomoko understood the prophecy in his words, "Institutions endure." 90 generations later, the OC Bible and the commentaries permeated the religious universe. When Paul Muad'Dib stood with his right hand on the rock shrine enclosing his father's skull, the right hand of the blessed, not the left hand of the damned, he quoted word for word from Bomoko's legacy. "You who have defeated us say to yourselves that Babylon is fallen, and its works have been overturned. I say to you still that man remains on trial, each man in his own dock. Each man is a little war." The Fremen said of Muad'Dib that he was like Abu Zide, whose frigate defied the Guild and rode one day there and back. There, used in this way, translates directly from the Fremen mythology as the land of the Ru spirit, the Alam al-Mithal, where all limitations are removed. The parallel between this and the Kwisatz Haderach is readily seen. The Kwisatz Haderach that the Sisterhood sought through its breeding program was interpreted as the shortening of the way, or the one who can be two places simultaneously. But both of these interpretations can be shown to stem directly from the commentaries. When law and religious duty are one, your selfdom encloses the universe. Of himself, Muad'Dib said, "I am a net in the sea of time, free to sweep future and past. I am a moving membrane from whom no possibility can escape." These thoughts are all one and the same, and they hearken to 22 Kalima in the OC Bible, where it says, "Whether a thought is spoken or not, it is a real thing, and has powers of reality." It is when we get into Muad'Dib's own commentaries in The Pillars of the Universe, as interpreted by his holy men, the Kizara Tafwid, that we see his real debt to CET and Fremen Zen Sunni. Muad'Dib. Law and duty are one, so be it. But remember these limitations. Thus are you never fully self-conscious. Thus do you remain immersed in the communal Tao. Thus are you always less than an individual. OC Bible, identical wording, 61 Revelations. Muad'Dib. Religion often partakes of the myth of progress that shields us from the terrors of an uncertain future. CET Commentaries, identical wording. The Azhar book traces this statement to the 1st century religious writer Neshu through a paraphrase. Muad'Dib. If a child, an untrained person, an ignorant person, or an insane person incites trouble, it is the fault of authority for not predicting and preventing that trouble. OC Bible. Any sin can be ascribed, at least in part, to a natural bad tendency that is an extenuating circumstance acceptable to God. The Azhar book traces this to the ancient Semitic Torah. Muad'Dib. Reach forth thy hand and eat what God has provided thee, and when thou art replenished, praise the Lord. OC Bible, a paraphrase with identical meaning. The Azhar book traces this in slightly different form to First Islam. Muad'Dib, kindness is the beginning of cruelty. Fremen Kitab al-Ibar, the weight of a kindly God is a fearful thing. Did not God give us the burning sun, al-Lat? Did not God give us the mothers of moisture, reverend mothers? Did not God give us Shaitan, Iblis, Satan? From Shaitan did we not get the hurtfulness of speed? This is the source of the Fremen saying, speed comes from Shaitan. Consider, for every 100 calories of heat generated by exercise, speed, the body evaporates about 6 ounces of perspiration. The Fremen word for perspiration is baka, or tears, and in one pronunciation translates the life essence that Shaitan squeezes from your soul. Muad'Dib's arrival is called religiously timely by Cunnywell, but timing had little to do with it. As Muad'Dib himself said, I am here, so. It is, however, vital to an understanding of Muad'Dib's religious impact that you never lose sight of one fact. The Fremen were a desert people whose entire ancestry was accustomed to hostile landscapes. Mysticism isn't difficult when you survive each second by surmounting open hostility. You are there, so. With such a tradition, suffering is accepted, perhaps as unconscious punishment, but accepted. And it's well to note that Fremen ritual gives almost complete freedom from guilt feelings. This isn't necessarily because their law and religion were identical, making disobedience a sin. It's likely closer to the mark to say they cleansed themselves of guilt easily because their everyday existence required brutal judgments, often deadly, which in a softer land would burden men with unbearable guilt. This is likely one of the roots of Fremen emphasis on superstition, disregarding the missionaria protective administrations. What matter that whistling sands are an omen? What matter that you must make the sign of the fist when first you see first moon? A man's flesh is his own, and his water belongs to the tribe, and the mystery of life isn't a problem to solve, but a reality to experience. Omens help you remember this. And because you are here, because you have the religion, victory cannot evade you in the end. As the Bene Gesserit taught for centuries, long before they ran afoul of the Fremen, when religion and politics ride the same cart, when that cart is driven by a living holy man, Baraka, nothing can stand in their path. Appendix 3. Report on Bene Gesserit motives and purposes. Here follows an excerpt from the Summa prepared by her own agents at the request of the Lady Jessica immediately after the Arrakis affair. The candor of this report amplifies its value far beyond the ordinary. Because the Bene Gesserit operated for centuries behind the blind of a semi-mystic school while carrying on their selective breeding program among humans, we tend to award them with more status than they appear to deserve. Analysis of their trial of fact on the Arrakis affair betrays the school's profound ignorance of its own role. It may be argued that the Bene Gesserit could examine only such facts as were available to them, and had no direct access to the person of the Prophet Muad'Dib. But the school had surmounted greater obstacles, and its error here goes deeper. The Bene Gesserit program had as its target the breeding of a person they labeled Kwisatz Haderach, a term signifying one who can be many places at once. In simpler terms, what they sought was a human with mental powers permitting him to understand and use higher-order dimensions. They were breeding for a super mentat, a human computer with some of the prescient abilities found in guild navigators. Now, attend these facts carefully. Muad'Dib, born Paul Atreides, was the son of the Duke Leto, a man whose bloodline had been watched carefully for more than 1,000 years. The Prophet's mother, Lady Jessica, was a natural daughter of the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and carried gene markers whose supreme importance to the breeding program was known for almost 2,000 years. She was a Bene Gesserit bred and trained, and should have been a willing tool of the project. The Lady Jessica was ordered to produce an Atreides daughter. The plan was to inbreed this daughter with Fade Rautha Harkonnen, a nephew of the Baron Vladimir, with the high probability of a Kwisatz Haderach from that union. Instead, for reasons she confesses have never been completely clear to her, the concubine Lady Jessica defied her orders and bore a son. This alone should have alerted the Bene Gesserit to the possibility that a wild variable had entered their scheme. But there were other far more important indications that they virtually ignored. 1. As a youth, Paul Atreides showed ability to predict the future. He was known to have had prescient visions that were accurate, penetrating, and defied four-dimensional explanation. 2. The Reverend Mother Gaius Helen Mohiam, Bene Gesserit proctor who tested Paul's humanity when he was 15, deposes that he surmounted more agony in the test than any other human of record. Yet she failed to make special note of this in her report. 3. When family Atreides moved to the planet Arrakis, the Fremen population there hailed the young Paul as a prophet, the voice from the outer world. The Bene Gesserit were well aware that the rigors of such a planet as Arrakis, with its totality of desert landscape, its absolute lack of open water, its emphasis on the most primitive necessities for survival, inevitably produces a higher proportion of sensitives. Yet this Fremen reaction and the obvious element of the Arrakeen diet high in spice were glossed over by Bene Gesserit observers. 4. When the Harkonnens and the soldier fanatics of the Padishah Emperor reoccupied Arrakis, killing Paul's father and most of the Atreides troops, Paul and his mother disappeared. But almost immediately there were reports of a new religious leader among the Fremen, a man called Muad'Dib, who again was hailed as the voice from the outer world. The reports stated clearly that he was accompanied by a new Reverend Mother of the Sayadina Rite, who is the woman who bore him. Records available to the Bene Gesserit stated in plain terms that the Fremen legends of the prophet contained these words, "He shall be born of a Bene Gesserit witch." It may be argued here that the Bene Gesserit sent their Missionaria Protectiva unto Arrakis centuries earlier to implant something like this legend as safeguard should any members of the school be trapped there and require sanctuary, and that this legend of the voice from the outer world was properly to be ignored because it appeared to be the standard Bene Gesserit ruse. But this would be true only if you granted that the Bene Gesserit were correct in ignoring the other clues about Paul Muad'Dib. 5. When the Arrakis affair boiled up, the Spacing Guild made overtures to the Bene Gesserit. The Guild hinted that its navigators, who used the spice drug of Arrakis to produce the limited prescience necessary for guiding spaceships through the void, were bothered about the future or saw problems on the horizon. This could only mean they saw a nexus, a meeting place of countless delicate decisions beyond which the path was hidden from the prescient eye. This was a clear indication that some agency was interfering with higher-order dimensions. A few of the Bene Gesserit had long been aware that the Guild could not interfere directly with the vital spice source because Guild navigators already were dealing in their own inept way with higher-order dimensions, at least to the point where they recognized that the slightest misstep they made on Arrakis could be catastrophic. It was a known fact that Guild navigators could predict no way to take control of the spice without producing just such a nexus. The obvious conclusion was that someone of higher order powers was taking control of the spice source, yet the Bene Gesserit missed this point entirely. In the face of these facts, one is led to the inescapable conclusion that the inefficient Bene Gesserit behavior in this affair was a product of an even higher plan, of which they were completely unaware.
This ends the final appendix, bringing to an end this recording of Dune.
God wins. So endeth Dune Wave. Live audio book club. Recorded live on the main stream in the final months of 2020 AD. Shouts out to everyone who was here. Shouts out to everyone who joined us live. Shouts out to wife who bought water. Shouts out to small son who threw a sock at me. Go and say hi, Hercules. Thank you, beautiful wife. Hey, it's Hercules. How are you doing?
Good. Take a look.
Say that again. Yeah, anyway. Oh, I still got the low voice effect on.
What was that? Where's he going? Oh my goodness. Son.
Us.
What's that?
The background's like when you get.
To talk into the microphone.
The background is like when you get voted off in Among Us.
Is it? Oh wow, there you go.
Herc was voted off.
Herc was voted off. Goodbye, Herc. Yo! That's so trippy. That's so trippy. 1 second, you're like deep in the mythos of Arrakis and the entire surrounding cosmos. Next second, your son's throwing a sock at you. That's so trippy! Yeah. Oh, I'm so trippy right now. That was so deep! D-Man says, Orange Man sus. Rob Easy says, this is a great ending. Ain't it just? Woo! Red Dracon says, I want to name my kid Achilles. Make sure you get him some steel socks, you know? Yo, that was emotional. That was emotional. Shouts out to everyone who was here during that. Shouts out to everyone who came, you know, here every week and hung out. This very unique experiment. I don't know of anyone having done anything like this before. Maybe they have. I don't know about it. I certainly haven't live DJ scored a book so voluminous and epic. It has not been done by me. Now it has. Now it has. Now I can say this is the thing I've done. WordXP says now time to mash up all the videos together for one long full book experience. Indeed, yes, that has been something I've had an awareness that could be useful. Red Dracon says this was my favorite way to spend a Wednesday evening. I have enjoyed it too. It's been very, very intense, very, very hard. I don't know if hard is the right word. Not easy. It's strangely physically demanding. It's a very unique form of DJing. You're kind of anticipating story, like changes in tones of voice and things as triggers for maneuvering musically. It's very, very, very interesting. Zach Souser says, I think this experiment was highly successful. Or at the very least, I really loved it, by Jove. Hey, thanks, Zach. Brian F says, God spoke and it happened. Indeed. Indeed. Indeed, indeed, indeed. Where is that song that I want to play? There it is. Yo, that end stuff was epic as well. Yeah, initially I was like, oh shit, I should just finish it on the end of the story. So we have time to, you know, soak up the story and not move straight onto that stuff at the end. But then that stuff at the end, I think, ended up being my favorite stuff. And I really, really enjoyed the whole thing, but I loved the way all that stuff at the end kind of flowed. And it was nice, you know, because all the different bits of Dune for me had a kind of sonic quality, some of which was somewhat unnerving, and some of which was very lovely. But then the end stuff had quite a different feeling for me, anyway. That kind of like brought the whole thing all the way around, and I don't know. It was very nice. It was very nice, Pedro. Kyla, what's up? John McGarvey, what's up? Zach, what's up? D-Man, what's up? Says great success. Soja says, Mike, son got the book for Christmas and read it in 2 days. He finished Dune before me. Ah! Incredibly rich world building. Incredibly rich. I love that shit. He didn't spend pages describing the food, did he? No. No, shouts out to your boy. Your boy. Herbert. What a guy. What an absolute unit. And in a strange way, like, you know, people who went to the Avatar, and there were some people, furries or whatever you call them. You know, they left Avatar and they're like, I want to go back there. I don't want to leave. Yeah, I'll be a bit like that with this, you know. I like going to the rackets on Wednesdays, you know. It was cool. But well, you know, we stay in the present. We do our very darndest around here to exist in the present moment with an aim. You know, we have an aim, and then we put in place systems, and we engage ourselves in those systems in the very, very moment, you know. Systems to carry us forward. You who defeated us say to yourselves that Babylon is fallen and its works have been overturned. I say to you still that man remains on trial, each man in his own dock. Each man is a little war. My First Stuff says there are 5 more books in the saga. Herbert books, those, right? Of course, Herbert died before finishing. Which is why all those George R.R. Martin fans are rightly concerned. Fool Killer says, don't be sad it's over, be glad it happened. That's right. Zach Hutchins says, back to reality, many thanks. Hey, thank you. Thank you all for being here. Sudrich says, strange how many phrases today were spoken by Viveki yesterday. Well, it isn't though, is it? I mean, that's exactly what you would expect to happen in this magical Meaningwave universe. I found it pleasing. I definitely found it pleasing, but not strange. Pleasing. Job Father says, fear is the mind killer indeed. Now, you know, it's interesting that, it's interesting. Again, Not strange. Pleasing. We finished that there with a look into the cosmic ramifications of our religion. And next Wednesday on the Meaning stream, we shall be beginning a new journey. Or rather, picking up something that we started a while ago and looking forward to continuing. January 2021 is JBP Wave season, brothers and sisters, and that means we shall be returning to the Bible lectures with Dr. Jordan B. Peterson. Each Wednesday, beginning 2021, and 2021 begins next week. By Jove. By Jove, it is true, it is true, it is true, it is not a lie. It's the Bible Lectures season every Wednesday on the Meaning stream with your boy Akira the Don and your boy JBP. There's no double in there, just a P. We gonna make it beautiful, baby. Oh, what a glorious thing. Oh, what a glorious thing. We gonna make it beautiful, baby. We gonna explore. We're going to explore the foundation, pun intended, of that cosmic religious legacy. We're going to go deep, deep as the abyss, every Wednesday, 2021. Rhymes with the dawn. Righteousness and righteousity. I want to thank you all for being here these past however many weeks. How many weeks have we done Dune, YouTube hero Alex? How many weeks have we done Dune? Yeah, it's a bunch. The last Dune of 2020. The last Meaningwave live audio book club of 2020. And tomorrow will be the last show of 2020. Tomorrow will be a special Meaningwave Live New Year's Eve party. Wow, we've been doing that since September, YouTube hero Alex. Since September, that's amazing. Amazing. I had no idea. 4-4. Hey, nice. Thank you, God. Shouts out to God. Verily. Well, I look forward to mulling over that whole experience, mulling over that whole thing. Mulling over Muad'Dib, Princess Irulan, Shani, Delaria. Sticking with the pointy end. My First Stuff says the previous biblical lectures were amazing. If you missed them, check them out. That was my very, very inaugural foray into the live DJ lecture scoring tradition that I invented. I should probably re-listen to them. I have some kind of ambitious plans for these that I wonder if I'm able to do. I wonder if I'm able to pull them off. Probably. Probably. Hey, I'm hyped for 2021. How about you guys, huh? Like I said, you know, we do our very, very best to exist as firmly in the moment as we can over here, but I am excited for the future, by Jove. I'm excited to have this present moment bleed into more present moments that are wonderful and full of adventure and wonder. Wisdom excavation, you know. Anyone got any idea what midnight it is at 7 a.m. CT? Midnight it is at 7 CT. I wonder if there's a website you can find this at. What midnight is it at 7? So says Fiji. How about 8? How about 9? Afghanistan. Happy New Year, Afghanistan. On Twitch tomorrow morning. Nepal, Sagittarius. You all have got question marks. Are any of these definitive statements of truth, or are you just making this up? Red Draco, what's cracking, baby? Appreciate you, says God bless all of you. I think he did. I think he did. Anyway, shoot, I don't know. All right, none of you lot know anything. And how could you? You've been deep in Arrakis. I can't expect you to know anything about world clocks, international time zones. I should know this stuff myself. Yeah. All right, gang. Thank you all for being here. We're going to get out of here now. Shout out to everyone who supported this thing tonight. Dave Owen, big shout out to you. Very much appreciated. Big up Luke. Big up Timothy Delgato. And big up your boy Chris O'Doe. Own it down in old California. If you want to support the wave, I would suggest going to meaningwave.com. Get yourself some epic merch like this epic Meaningwave Exists hoodie. It's so cozy. It's so true. It's so powerful in its message and presentation.
Akira.
Over there also you'll find the donation links. We got a Venmo, we got a Cash App, we got a Bitcoin, all that. We have a Patreon if you want to support on Patreon. You can become a channel member on YouTube if you so wish. If you're listening on the podcast feed, I would say go to meaningwave.com. And there you will find Bounty. You'll find Bounty, great Bounty. People write to me a lot and they say, hey, Akira, where can I find the lyrics? They are also at meaningwave.com. Meaningwave.com, you will find lyrics. By Jove, you shall. And of course, the most powerful thing you can do is let someone know the truth of the matter about the existence of Meaningwave. Meaningwave exists! It does! It really does. Shouts out to Young Riz. Young Riz, he had his birthday, I think he was 9. His mum sent me a video. He was at the birthday table with his little homies, and he was like, he did a birthday speech, he was like, oh, okay, I'm gonna do a birthday speech. Haven't got much to say, just wonderful to be here. Oh yeah, and Meaningwave exists. He shouted it the way I do, I was very proud of that 9-year-old future ruler of Venus. Oh, baby. Anyway, that's the facts. Meaningwave exists. And I'm getting out of here. Got to be up in a couple of hours. See you tomorrow morning for a New Year's Eve party somewhere on Earth. I don't know where. God bless. 3, 2, 1. Bye. Good night, Arrakis.